I still remember the hum of the city that night, faint and distant through the thick glass windows of the penthouse. My mop leaned against the counter, the marble floors already gleaming under the soft glow of recessed lights. Midnight had long passed, and I should have been on my way home. But instead, I was sitting at the far end of the living room, hunched over a battered laptop and a stack of law textbooks I'd borrowed from the public library. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that makes you hold your breath. I love that about my night shifts. When the city fell asleep, I could pretend I belonged to a world that wasn't mine. In those hours, the penthouse felt like a borrowed sanctuary, a place where I could hide my dreams from everyone else. My name is Emma Rodriguez. I clean other people's homes so I can keep a roof over my mom and little sister's heads. By day, I juggle two part-time jobs. By night, I chase a dream that sometimes feels bigger than I am. I study law. My father died when I was 19, caught in a mess he couldn't afford to fight. He was accused of something he didn't do at the construction site, but we didn't have the money for a lawyer who cared. I swore I would never let another family face that kind of helplessness if I could stop it. That night, my eyelids were heavy, but I forced myself to keep reading about labor rights and wrongful termination cases. The words blurred, and I blinked hard, willing myself to stay awake. My fingers were cramped around my pen as I scribbled notes, the sound of it soft against the luxury that surrounded me. Chandeliers, polished wood, art I didn't dare to touch. None of it was mine, but for a few hours, it felt like it was. And then, I heard it. A low, steady voice cut through the quiet. "What are you doing here?" I froze, my heart lurching like it wanted to leap out of my chest. The pen slipped from my fingers and rolled across the floor. Slowly, I turned. Standing in the doorway was Ethan Blake, the man who owned this penthouse, the man I'd only ever seen in passing when he signed for packages or left in his tailored suits. Tonight, he wasn't a polished architect gracing magazine covers. He was barefoot, in gray sweats and a black hoodie, hair slightly messy as if he'd been asleep. I finished cleaning, I stammered, scrambling to close my book. I'll go. I'm sorry. My voice cracked with panic. My mind ran through every possible consequence. Losing this job meant losing rent money. Losing rent money meant maybe losing the apartment my mom worked her fingers raw to keep. I could feel the heat climbing my neck. But Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't tell me to get out. He stepped into the room, his brow furrowed, and glanced at the open textbook. "You're studying law?" he asked, like the idea had caught him off guard. I hesitated, not sure if honesty would make things worse. "Yes," I whispered. "Online courses. I want to be a lawyer." He picked up my pen from the floor, rolled it between his fingers, and looked at me in a way no one ever did when I was in my uniform. Not like I was invisible. Not like I was just the girl who emptied trash cans and polished counters. "Why here?" he asked finally. I swallowed hard. "Because it's quiet. Because home is crowded. My mom works early. My sister studies at the kitchen table, and there's never any space. Here, for a few hours, I can focus." He didn't speak right away. The only sound was the distant hum of the city below and the thud of my pulse in my ears. I braced myself for the words I feared most. "You're fired." Instead, he walked past me to the far side of the room and flicked on the small lamp at his desk. A warm, golden light spilled across the bookshelves, reflecting off the glossy surface of the table. He gestured to it. "If you're going to study," he said quietly, "you should at least have proper light. Use the desk next time. It's better than crouching on the floor." I just stared at him, unable to find my voice. Relief and confusion tangled in my chest. In that moment, under the glow of that lamp, I realized something had shifted. He'd looked at me differently, like I wasn't just his maid. and that terrified me more than anything. I sat frozen for a moment, unsure if I'd misheard him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even asking me to leave. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned casually against the counter like finding his maid studying at 1 in the morning was perfectly normal. "So, law," he said finally, his voice calm but curious. "Why that?" My fingers fidgeted with the hem of my uniform. No one ever asked me that without judgment hidden behind the question. I hesitated, but something about the quiet and the soft glow of the desk lamp made me braver than usual. "My dad," I said softly. "He was a construction worker. One day there was an accident on site, and they blamed him for something he didn't do. He didn't speak English well, and we couldn't afford a good lawyer. He lost his job, and his dignity. He never recovered from it. I promised myself I'd learn the law, so maybe one day I can stop things like that from happening to people like him." I looked down at my hands, afraid I'd said too much. Admitting dreams like mine always made me feel exposed, like I was holding out something too fragile for the world to see. When I glanced up, Ethan wasn't smirking or dismissive. He was just listening, really listening. "My father was a builder too," he said after a pause. "Before he started his own firm, he used to come home with sawdust in his hair. He always said working hard was important, but knowing how to protect what you work for is even more important." I blinked at him, surprised by the sliver of common ground between us. In my head, he was someone who had always lived in glass towers and polished floors. It never occurred to me that he might understand the world I came from, even in some distant way. He set his glass down and nodded toward the desk again. "Next time, don't sit on the floor. Use the desk. The chair is better for your back, and the light won't ruin your eyes." I hesitated. Are you sure? I don't want to overstep." He almost smiled, just a faint curve at the corner of his mouth. "If you're putting in the effort to change your life, the least I can do is make sure you can see the page you're reading." Something in my chest tightened, a mix of gratitude and a warmth I didn't want to name. People rarely noticed me unless I'd missed a spot on a countertop or delivered a meal late. But he'd noticed me, not just my work, but me. I carefully gathered my books and laptop, carried them to the desk, and lowered myself into the leather chair. It felt absurdly soft, like sitting in someone else's life. The lamp's golden light spilled across the surface, illuminating the underlined passages in my book. For the first time that night, my shoulders eased. Ethan didn't hover. He just said, "I'll leave you to it," and disappeared down the hallway toward his bedroom. When the room fell silent again, I stared at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Thousands of lights blinked across San Francisco, like the world was full of possibilities I couldn't quite reach yet. My heart was still racing from the shock of being caught, but underneath it was something new, a faint, steady hum of hope. That night, as I bent over my textbook under the warm glow of the desk lamp, I realized this apartment wasn't just a place I cleaned anymore. It had become my little pocket of possibility, the first place where someone had looked at me and seen more than a maid. And I couldn't stop thinking about that look, even long after I went home. The nights that followed felt like stepping into a world that didn't belong to me, yet somehow welcomed me anyway. Every evening, after scrubbing the last counter and polishing the last glass, I would slip into the corner of Ethan's office with my books. The room smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, and the soft hum of the city below became the soundtrack to my secret life. The first night I used the desk, I half expected him to change his mind. Maybe he would walk in and remember I was just the maid. But he didn't. He would pass by quietly, sometimes with a cup of tea in hand, and nod toward the lamp like it was our unspoken agreement. One evening, he lingered. "You're always here," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Don't you ever sleep? I smiled faintly without looking up. Sleep feels expensive right now. I'm saving up for something bigger. He stepped into the room, his footsteps soft against the rug. Bigger like a law degree? I nodded. I know it sounds impossible, but it's all I've got. I can't change what happened to my dad, but maybe I can make sure someone else doesn't lose everything because they didn't know their rights. He was quiet for a moment, and I wondered if I'd said too much again. But then he walked over to the shelves and picked up a small, dark box. When he opened it, there was a fountain pen inside, black with gold trim, the kind that looked like it belonged in a lawyer's hand, not mine. This was my father's, he said, holding it out. The initials EB were engraved along the side. He signed his first architectural contract with this pen. I want you to use it when you study. Maybe it'll remind you that starting from the bottom doesn't mean you stay there. I hesitated, staring at the pen as if it were something fragile. I can't take this. You can borrow it, he said simply, as long as you keep working toward that dream. The pen felt heavy in my hand, not because of its weight, but because of what it symbolized: belief. It was the first time someone outside my family had looked at me and said, without words, I think you can do this. From that night on, the lamp and the pen became my companions. I would sit at the desk, the golden light pooling over my books, and scribble notes late into the night. Sometimes Ethan would join me, sitting across the desk with his laptop or a sketch pad. He told me about his first job out of college, sleeping in his car because he couldn't afford rent and office space at the same time. I told him about my mom cleaning houses for decades, saving every penny so my sister could finish the high school without working nights like I did. We were two people from different worlds, yet under that lamp, the gap felt a little smaller. One night, I caught him watching me as I read a case about workplace discrimination. You look different when you're focused, he said softly. I laughed under my breath. Different how? Like you're exactly where you're meant to be, he replied. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. But later, when I closed the book and tucked the pen into its box, I realized something had shifted. That office, with its warm light and quiet hum, had become more than a place to study. It had become a bridge between the life I was living and the life I wanted. And for the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could cross it. Over the next few weeks, those quiet nights in the penthouse became a rhythm I secretly lived for. The moment the cleaning was done, I would move to the office, switch on the lamp, and let its warm glow settle over my books. That little pool of light felt like a world of its own, carved out of marble and glass high above the city. Sometimes Ethan would sit across from me, sketching designs for his next project or typing on his laptop. We didn't always talk. The soft scratch of my pen and the faint tap of his keyboard became our own kind of conversation. But even in the comfort of that routine, I never forgot who I was. My uniform still smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, and my reflection in the dark window reminded me that this wasn't my world. When he would stand and stretch, moving effortlessly through the space like he owned the skyline outside, I would keep my eyes on my notes, careful not to slip into the illusion that we were equals. One night, he leaned back in his chair, watching me underline a passage. You remind me of my dad, he said. I looked up, surprised. Your dad? Yeah, he said with a small smile. He used to come home from construction sites covered in dust, but after dinner, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a pile of books and study architecture. Everyone told him it was a waste of time, that men like him didn't become architects, but he ignored them, kept studying, night after night, until he passed the licensing exam. That's how he started the company I run today. I let his words sink in. There was a warmth in my chest that I tried to push down, because hope was dangerous. I guess some things don't change, I said quietly. Working-class families still have to fight twice as hard for half a chance. He nodded slowly. But sometimes, the fight is what makes you ready for the chance when it comes. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, and I felt the air shift between us. I forced myself to glance away, pretending to reread the same sentence for the third time. I couldn't afford to let my heart misinterpret kindness for something more. In his world, I was the maid who borrowed a desk and a pen. Nothing more. Still, that night, I left the penthouse with a strange flutter in my chest. The streets of San Francisco glistened with rain, and my bus ride home felt shorter than usual. I caught myself touching the pen in my bag like it was a talisman, but beneath that fragile warmth was an unease I couldn't name. People like me weren't supposed to get comfortable in worlds like his, and comfort, I knew, could be dangerous. I didn't realize then that the first crack in our fragile bubble was already forming, waiting for the right moment to shatter everything. It was a Wednesday night, the kind of night when the city outside the penthouse seemed half asleep. I had finished mopping the kitchen floor and wiped down the counters until they gleamed. My textbooks waited in the office, and as always, the small ritual of turning on the desk lamp felt like stepping into a secret life that belonged only to me. I had just started reviewing a chapter on workplace harassment when I heard the soft ding of the elevator down the hall. It was unusual for anyone to come up this late. I froze, listening. A few seconds later, the front door opened and heels clicked against the marble floor. "Ethan, are you home?" The voice was crisp, older, and unmistakably confident. My chest tightened. I had never met his mother, but I didn't need an introduction to know who she was. Before I could gather my books or even stand, she appeared at the doorway of the office. Tall, silver hair perfectly styled, a cream coat draped elegantly over her shoulders. Her sharp eyes swept the room and landed on me, sitting at her son's desk with my open laptop and a borrowed fountain pen in hand. The way she looked at me made the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just surprise, it was disapproval, cold and absolute, like I had stepped into a place I had no right to exist. "And who?" she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Are you?" I. "I'm Emma," I stammered, rising to my feet so fast my chair scraped the floor. "I clean the apartment. I was just—" My words tangled in my throat. "Just what?" she pressed, her brow arching. Her gaze drifted to the law books, the pen, the notes scrawled in my handwriting. "Playing secretary? Pretending this is your office?" The humiliation burned hot under my skin. I study at night, after I finish my work. Ethan said it was okay to use the desk. Her laugh was sharp and humorless. Of course he did. He's always too soft-hearted for his own good. But let me be clear. This is not a study hall. You are here to clean, not to linger. Each word landed like a stone in my stomach. I wanted to explain, to defend the hours I had poured into this dream, but my voice wouldn't come. All I could do was lower my head and gather my books, fingers trembling as I shoved papers into my bag. She stepped closer, her perfume sharp and expensive, her presence filling the doorway like a wall. "Girls like you should know your place. My son's generosity is not an invitation to make yourself comfortable in his world." The words sliced deeper than I expected. I had told myself I understood the line between our lives, but hearing it out loud, so plain, so cruel, made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. I whispered, "I'm sorry," though the apology tasted like defeat. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hall. Ethan appeared, his hair damp from a shower, wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. The relaxed look on his face vanished the moment he saw his mother and me frozen in the office doorway. "Mom?" His eyes flicked to me, then to the books clutched against my chest. "What's going on?" "I came to see my son," she said smoothly. "And I found This. Your maid, making herself very comfortable in your study. Ethan's jaw tightened, and for a moment he didn't answer. I couldn't read his expression. Anger, frustration, maybe even guilt. But the silence was enough to twist the knife in my chest. "I'll go," I blurted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm finished here anyway." I slipped past them into the hall, my heart pounding. My shoes squeaked against the marble as I hurried to the service elevator, wishing I could disappear. Behind me, I heard his mother's voice, low and sharp, and Ethan's deeper tone answering, but I didn't stay to listen. By the time the elevator doors closed, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the pen. The little world I had built under that lamp, the fragile bridge I thought I was crossing, felt like it had crumbled in an instant. I rode down alone, staring at my reflection in the brushed metal walls. For the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake believing I could belong anywhere outside my own world. The night after Mrs. Blake found me in the office, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. I still took the bus across the Bay Bridge, still wore the same uniform, still carried my heavy books. But the air felt different. The penthouse no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a place where I'd been caught trespassing in someone else's world. I walked through the gleaming lobby of Golden Heights, keeping my head down. The security guard gave me a polite nod, but I swore I saw curiosity flicker in his eyes. Maybe I was imagining it. Or maybe Mrs. Blake's sharp words were still echoing in my mind. Girls like you should know your place. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with mopping floors. I hugged my textbooks to my chest and headed toward the staff exit that led to the side street. That's when I heard the voice I least wanted to hear. Well, well, if it isn't my ambitious little girlfriend? I froze. Marco. He was leaning against a lamppost near the building, a leather jacket thrown over a hoodie, his hair damp from the drizzle. His smile was crooked, the kind that used to charm me when I was too young to know better. "I told you, Marco," I muttered, picking up my pace. "We're done. Stop waiting for me." He fell into step beside me, his sneakers splashing in shallow puddles. "I just wanted to see how you're doing. Heard you've been busy. Late nights with your fancy boss, huh?" My stomach twisted. "Don't start." "Relax. I'm just saying what everyone else is already thinking." He tilted his head toward the tower of glass and steel behind us. A maid working late in a millionaire's apartment? People notice things. Bet they think you're trying to climb out of the gutter the easy way. I clenched my jaw and kept walking, but his words stuck like burrs. He didn't know about Mrs. Blake, but his taunts reopened the wound she'd left the night before. Marco laughed under his breath. "Come on, Emma, don't act like you're better than me now. You think that guy actually sees you as anything but entertainment? One day he'll get bored and you'll be back where you started. Maybe I'll still be around." I stopped in my tracks and spun to face him. My voice shook, but it was firm. "I don't need you. I don't need anyone who tries to drag me down just because they're too scared to climb up themselves. Leave me alone, Marco." For a second, his smirk faltered, but then he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Careful, Emma. Word travels fast. A little rumor could make your life here very uncomfortable." I didn't wait for more. I pushed past him and walked straight to the bus stop, my hands trembling inside my pockets. The rain soaked my uniform as I waited, my reflection rippling in the wet pavement. By the end of that week, I could feel it. Whispers following me in the lobby, the way the doorman's polite smile seemed tinged with knowing. The building had its own kind of gossip, quiet but relentless. A maid caught studying in the boss's office, a young girl leaving late at night. People didn't need the truth. They preferred the story that fit their assumptions. Each rumor was a reminder of the invisible line I had dared to cross. And suddenly, The dream that had felt so close under the glow of that desk lamp felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I told myself to focus on school, on my family, on the future I wanted. But every step into that building felt heavier than the last, and I couldn't shake the question that kept circling my mind. How long could I keep walking a bridge that everyone else was waiting for me to fall off? Rain slicked the streets of San Francisco that night, turning the city into a blur of silver and neon. I pressed my forehead against the cold window of the staff lounge, watching the storm sweep across the bay. My shift had ended an hour ago, but I lingered, paralyzed by the decision I'd been circling for days. Mrs. Blake's cutting words and Marco's poisonous whispers had carved deep grooves in my mind. Every time I walked through the lobby of Golden Heights, I felt their judgment clinging to me like wet clothes, and no matter how much I tried to focus on my studies, the warmth of Ethan's office had turned into a space full of shadows. That night, something inside me broke, or maybe it finally bent enough to let go. I climbed the private staircase to the penthouse one last time. The building hummed with its usual mechanical heartbeats, the elevator cables, the low thrum of the heating system, the distant rain tapping against glass. When I opened the door with my keycard, the apartment smelled faintly of cedar and rain-soaked air. I moved quietly, as if I were a guest in a museum. My sneakers squeaked softly on the polished floor as I made my way to the office. The lamp was exactly where I had left it. Its golden light had been my anchor, my small piece of borrowed courage. I switched it on, and the room bloomed in warmth. For a moment, I just stood there, soaking it in. The desk, the chair, the skyline glimmering through the rain-streaked windows. This had been my secret world. I opened my bag and took out the fountain pen, the one with EB engraved on its side. I traced the letters with my thumb. It wasn't just a pen, it was a promise. A bridge between two lives that were never meant to touch. With a shaky breath, I placed it gently in the center of the desk. The sound of it hitting the wood, soft, almost inaudible, felt like closing a chapter I wasn't ready to finish. I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you." I wasn't sure if I was speaking to Ethan, to the pen, or to the girl I had been under that lamp. Hopeful, determined, unafraid for a few stolen hours. I took one last look around the office. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass of the window, and for the first time, I didn't see a maid or a trespasser. I saw a young woman trying to climb, slipping and bruising herself along the way, but still climbing. When I stepped out into the hall, the weight in my chest lifted a little. The pain of leaving was real, sharp enough to sting, but underneath it was something like relief. I wouldn't have to walk past whispered rumors. I wouldn't have to wonder when the next judgment would fall. By the time I reached the staff elevator, rainwater drummed against the roof of the building like an impatient heartbeat. I swiped my card and the doors opened with a soft chime. On the ride down, I watched the floor numbers light up, one by one. My reflection in the metal wall was pale, but my eyes looked steadier than I expected. Outside, the rain hit my face like a wake-up call. I pulled my hoodie tight and walked toward the bus stop, shoes splashing through shallow puddles. Behind me, Golden Heights rose like a gleaming tower above the wet streets, its windows glowing warm against the storm. Somewhere up there, the desk lamp would keep shining for a while longer, spilling light over an empty chair. And I knew that part of me would always belong to that light, even as I forced myself to walk away into the rain. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of traffic and the faint rattle of the old heater in our Oakland apartment. My world had shrunk overnight. Gone were the glass walls, the sweeping views of the bay, and the warm glow of that desk lamp. Instead, I was back in the small bedroom I shared with my younger sister Lila, with peeling paint on the ceiling and the smell of fried eggs drifting in from the kitchen. "Morning," Lila said when I shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep. She was in her high school sweatshirt, stuffing books into her backpack. My mom glanced up from the stove, her face lined with exhaustion but soft with relief when she saw me. "You're home early these days," she said, sliding a plate of eggs toward me. "No more night shifts?" I hesitated. Number I left that job. She didn't ask why, at least not right away. Maybe she could see in my face that the story was heavy, and I didn't have the strength to lift it yet. A week later, I started working part-time at a tiny law office downtown. It wasn't glamorous. I answered phones, filed papers, and sometimes fetched coffee. But I got to sit near real attorneys, hear their conversations, and see how cases moved through the system. Every day, I touched the law in some small way, even if it was just alphabetizing client files. In the quiet moments between tasks, I thought about the penthouse. Not the luxury or the view, but the office, the soft light of the desk lamp spilling across my books, the way the city outside felt like a painting, and the pen with EB engraved on its side. That space had made me believe in a bigger version of myself, and leaving it behind felt like leaving a piece of my heart on that polished wooden desk. One evening, after the office closed, I stayed behind to finish an online assignment. I sat at a wobbly second-hand desk under the flicker of a fluorescent light, and for a moment, my chest ached with the memory of the golden lamp in Ethan's office. I missed the quiet confidence that room had given me. But then I looked around. My surroundings weren't glamorous, but they were mine. No one was watching, no one was judging, and no one could take this small victory away from me. For the first time in weeks, I felt my feet under me again. I started building a new routine: work at the law office in the afternoons, study at night in our tiny kitchen while Lila did her homework across from me. My mom would hum softly as she folded laundry, the rhythm of home grounding me. It wasn't the skyline of San Francisco, but it was steady. And for now, steady was enough. Sometimes, as I highlighted a passage in my law textbook, I would catch myself glancing at the corner of the table, almost expecting the glint of that fountain pen. It wasn't there, of course, but the lessons it represented, the courage to step into a bigger life, even for a moment, stayed with me. I still felt the loss. The bridge I'd tried to walk between two worlds had crumbled, and I was back on familiar ground. But with each day I spent filing papers, reading cases, and pushing forward on my own, I realized I wasn't broken. I was still moving. And maybe, for now, that was enough. 3 months passed before I saw him again. By then, my life had settled into a rhythm that was quieter, humbler, and lonelier. Mornings started with the rattle of the old bus. Afternoons were spent at the tiny law office, and evenings belonged to online lectures and a chipped coffee mug that kept me company on our kitchen table. I told myself I didn't need the penthouse or its golden lamp to chase my dream. And yet, sometimes when the city lights blinked outside our apartment window, I felt that same ache, a reminder of the world I had stepped into and then walked away from. It was a gray Friday afternoon when I left the law office early to submit paperwork for my upcoming exams at the university campus in downtown Oakland. The wind off the bay carried a damp chill, and I was thinking only about making it home in time to study before Lila got back from school. Then I saw him. He was standing across the street, leaning against a black SUV parked near the campus gates, wearing a navy coat and dark jeans. Even in the crowd of students and traffic, Ethan Blake stood out, not because of wealth or status, but because seeing him was like opening a door I thought I'd locked. My steps faltered. My first instinct was to turn around, to protect the small, fragile life I'd built since leaving his world. But his eyes met mine before I could move. There was no mistaking the recognition, or the hesitation, as he crossed the street toward me. "Emma?" he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. Mr. Blake, I replied automatically, the formality slipping out before I could stop it. He winced at the distance in my tone but didn't call it out. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and held something out to me. The fountain pen. Black with gold trim, the letters EB catching in the muted afternoon light. I believe this belongs to you, he said. I shook my head. It never did. Then let's call it a loan I wasn't ready to let go of, he said softly. I came to return it, and to say I'm sorry. I swallowed hard, unsure if my chest ached from anger or relief. You don't owe me an apology. I knew what I was walking into. I should have protected you, he said, his voice tightening. When my mother humiliated you, when the whispers started, I let it happen. I didn't speak up, and you paid the price for my silence. That wasn't fair to you. I wanted to tell him I didn't need his guilt, that I'd moved on. But the truth was, hearing him admit it eased a knot I hadn't realized I was carrying. He hesitated, then added, I also wanted you to know I started a scholarship fund. For building staff, service workers, anyone chasing education while working full-time. I named it after my father. You were the reason I did it. The words struck me like a soft blow. I stared at the pen in his hand, but didn't reach for it. That's good, I said finally. My voice trembled despite my effort to keep it steady. People like me need someone to believe in them, even if it's not me anymore. His jaw flexed, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of hurt. It's still you, Emma. It's always been you. I took the pen, my fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. The familiar weight of it settled in my palm, and I felt a swirl of gratitude, fear, and something I didn't want to name. Thank you, I said, stepping back. But I have to keep moving on my own. I can't. I can't step into that world again. Not yet. He nodded slowly, accepting my boundary even as his eyes held a quiet hope. Then I'll wait for the day you don't feel like you're stepping into my world anymore. Because the truth is, I want it to be ours. I couldn't answer. I turned toward the campus gate, clutching the pen as if it could steady me. Behind me, the city hummed, and the distance between us felt both necessary and unbearably heavy. The weeks after seeing Ethan again felt different. It wasn't that my life suddenly changed. My mornings were still crowded buses and coffee in paper cups. My evenings still a kitchen table stacked with law books. But something inside me had shifted. Every time I picked up the fountain pen, my fingers traced the letters EB, and a quiet warmth spread through me. I didn't see it as a lifeline to another world anymore. It was proof that someone outside my family had once looked at me and said, in their own way, I see you. I believe in you. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe without the constant weight of shame. I wasn't just the maid who had overstepped. I was a law student, a future attorney, someone fighting her way forward step by step. I threw myself into my studies with a new focus. I spent late nights at the public library when our apartment got too noisy, under fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. Sometimes, when I opened my laptop or bent over a case brief, I felt the memory of that penthouse office settle around me. Not the marble or the skyline, but the glow of the desk lamp and the quiet of being in a space where my dream felt real. I didn't go back. Not yet. I told myself it was better this way. Distance gave me the room to grow without leaning on anyone's shadow, even his. I needed to prove, if only to myself, that I could build a future with my own hands. Still, some nights, when the city outside our apartment hummed with distant traffic and the soft light of our kitchen bulb pooled over my books, I caught myself whispering in my head, the desk lamp is still there. It's waiting for me, in another life, on another day. One Saturday afternoon, I walked past Golden Heights on my way to the library. Rain from the morning still streaked the glass, and the top floors reflected a pale winter sun. I stopped across the street, my breath catching in my chest. Somewhere up there, the office waited. Maybe Ethan was sketching plans or reading contracts. Maybe the lamp was on, casting its circle of light across an empty desk. I thought about stepping inside, just to see it again, to remind myself that I hadn't imagined the small world we'd built in those quiet nights. But I stayed on the sidewalk, clutching my backpack straps tighter. Not today. Instead, I turned and kept walking toward the library, toward the life I was still building brick by brick. I studied until the lights flickered at closing time. On my way out, the librarian smiled at the stack of books in my arms. "Late night again?" she asked. I nodded, feeling a spark of pride instead of exhaustion. "Every night until I get there." That night, lying in my narrow bed, I stared at the pen resting on the milk crate I used as a nightstand. I thought of Ethan's voice, soft but certain, telling me he'd wait until I didn't feel like a stranger in his world. Maybe that day would come. Maybe it wouldn't. But for now, I was finally standing on my own feet, and that felt like enough. Somewhere, in the tallest building on the block, a golden desk lamp might still be shining, patient and steady. In my mind, it whispered a promise. When you're ready, you'll find your way back. And this time, it will be on your terms. 1 year later, I found myself standing in a narrow hallway outside a labor court in downtown San Francisco, clutching the fountain pen with EB engraved on its side. My hands were damp, but not from fear. At least, not entirely. The past 12 months had been the hardest and most transformative of my life. I juggled my job at the tiny law office, online classes, and a weekend internship with a nonprofit that fought for domestic and service workers' rights. Sleep was a luxury, and coffee had become my closest companion. But every late night in the library, every file I organized, every bus ride across the bay had led me here. My very first case observation, where I was finally allowed to step forward and assist as a student representative. The case involved a janitor from a luxury hotel who had been fired after reporting unsafe working conditions. His face reminded me of my father's, tired, proud, and quietly bracing for disappointment. When the clerk opened the courtroom doors, I walked in behind the lead attorney, my notes tucked under my arm, and tried to ignore the way my heart pounded. Then I froze. Sitting quietly in the back row were two figures I hadn't expected to see: Ethan and Mrs. Blake. He was in a charcoal suit, his posture relaxed but his eyes fixed on me with something between pride and apology. Mrs. Blake sat beside him, straighter than a ruler, her silver hair immaculate. She didn't glare. She didn't smile either. She just watched. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. All the old shame and unease from that night in the penthouse flooded back. But then I felt the pen in my hand, smooth and solid, and reminded myself why I was here. I wasn't the maid sneaking study hours anymore. I was Emma Rodriguez, law student, future attorney, and advocate for workers like my father, and like the man sitting nervously at the plaintiff's table. The judge entered and the hearing began. I focused on the rhythm of the proceedings, the attorney questioning witnesses, the defense fumbling under the weight of ignored safety reports. I took careful notes, occasionally passing documents forward, and when the attorney nodded for me to hand the client a form, I felt my hand steady. When the janitor spoke, his voice trembled at first, but then he described the slippery floors, the broken equipment, the way management ignored his complaints. His story wasn't unique, but it was his, and it deserved to be heard. As he finished, I glanced toward the gallery. Ethan's eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to look away. Mrs. Blake's gaze followed, unreadable, but she didn't turn aside. During a brief recess, I stepped into the hallway for air. The old courthouse smelled of varnish and rain-soaked coats. My chest felt tight, but not from panic, something closer to pride. Footsteps approached, soft against the marble. I turned to see Ethan standing a few feet away. "You're incredible," he said quietly. His voice carried no grand gesture, just awe. "Seeing you in there? It's exactly where you belong." I swallowed, emotions knotting in my throat. "I'm just doing my part. For people like him. For my dad." He nodded, his eyes glinting. "And maybe for yourself too." Before I could answer, the bailiff called us back in. I returned to my seat, the pen steady in my hand. When the judge delivered the decision, a ruling in favor of the janitor with a recommendation for compensation, I felt a surge of warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't my victory, not officially. But in that moment, it felt like a piece of my life had clicked into place. As the courtroom emptied, I lingered by the door. Ethan and Mrs. Blake approached slowly. For the first time, her expression softened just enough for me to catch it. "You did well," she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever imagined it could be. It wasn't forgiveness or friendship, but it was acknowledgement. And for me, that was enough. I stepped out into the afternoon light with the pen in my hand and the city buzzing around me, feeling like I had finally set foot on a bridge I had been building piece by piece all along. The courtroom felt smaller after the judge's ruling, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen to the silence that followed. Then, slowly, the weight of the decision sank in. The janitor won. He pressed a hand to his face, overwhelmed, whispering something I couldn't hear. The lead attorney shook his hand firmly. I stood a few steps away, gripping the pen with EB engraved on the side, and felt something bloom in my chest. A mixture of pride, relief, and a quiet sense of belonging. I glanced toward the gallery. Ethan's face held that steady, warm pride I had come to recognize, but it was his mother who made me pause. Mrs. Blake's eyes were on me, her sharp gaze softened in a way I had never seen. It wasn't quite a smile, but it wasn't the cold wall I remembered either. Outside, rain speckled the courthouse steps. I waited with the client as he signed the final documents, his hands shaking as he tried to process what this win meant. A clean record, a chance to work again, a validation that he had been treated unfairly. I thought of my father then, and my throat tightened. When the papers were complete, I stepped into the gray afternoon. Ethan and his mother were waiting near the steps, standing under a single black umbrella. Mrs. Blake spoke first. Her voice was even, but quieter than I expected. "Thank you," she said. Two simple words. But coming from her, they carried the weight of a bridge lowering between us, tentative but real. I blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "For helping that man," she said, her silver hair catching the drizzle. "For doing what you said you wanted to do. I see now that I was wrong about you." The tightness in my chest shifted into something else. Acceptance, maybe. I didn't need her approval to define me, but hearing it felt like closing a wound I hadn't realized was still open. "You don't need to thank me," I said quietly. "I'm just doing the work I promised myself I would do." Her lips pressed together in something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't disapproval either. She inclined her head slightly, and that small gesture felt monumental. Ethan watched the exchange in silence, his hand brushing against mine briefly as if to say, "I told you this day would come." As we walked toward the curb, I realized something had shifted inside me. For so long, I had carried the weight of an invisible wall between their world and mine, a wall built of marble floors, sharp words, and my own fear of not belonging. Today, that wall didn't feel as high. Maybe it had been lowered brick by brick over the past year. Every late-night study session, every bus ride, every page of law I had learned under harsh fluorescent lights. And now, standing in the drizzle with the pen in my hand and my head held higher than before, I knew I had stepped through it. The victory wasn't just for the janitor. It was for the girl who had once sat trembling under a golden desk lamp, too scared to believe she could stand in this place. I turned the pen in my fingers, feeling the engraving press lightly against my skin. E.B., I thought of Ethan's father, of my own father, of all the people whose dreams had been smaller because no one believed in them. As the rain began to ease, Mrs. Blake slipped into the car first, leaving Ethan and me standing on the sidewalk for a moment. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough. I watched the car pull away and felt a strange, steady calm settle over me. This wasn't the end of my journey, but I knew something fundamental had changed. I had walked across the invisible bridge I'd been building all along, and this time, I wasn't walking alone. The night of the scholarship fund's launch felt like walking into a version of my own dream. The event was held in a renovated art gallery downtown, its brick walls washed in soft gold light, filled with people in tailored suits and evening dresses. I moved among them in a navy dress that my sister Lila had picked out, feeling both like myself and someone entirely new. The Rodriguez and Blake Scholarship Fund, a name Ethan insisted on even though I argued against it, was real now. Applications were open to janitors, nannies, cafeteria workers, and all the invisible people who kept the city running but rarely had a chance to chase something bigger. As I listened to the murmurs around the room and the clinking of glasses, I thought of all the nights I had studied under that single desk lamp, wondering if anyone would ever see me. When the speeches were done and the crowd thinned, Ethan found me by the back doors. He didn't need to ask if I wanted to leave. He could read it in my eyes. "Come on," he said softly. "I want to show you something." We drove through the familiar streets toward Golden Heights. My chest tightened as the building came into view, its glass walls reflecting the city lights. I hadn't been back inside since the day I left in the rain. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent except for the hum of the machinery. When the doors opened, the apartment smelled the same: cedar, faint coffee, and something distinctly Ethan. My heels clicked softly on the marble as he led me down the hall toward the office. When he opened the door, I froze. The room was exactly as I remembered it: the sleek desk, the tall bookshelves, the floor-to-ceiling window framing the city like a living painting. But there were new touches, too. On the wall hung a framed photo from the courthouse steps after the janitor's victory. Me in a simple blazer, holding my books, eyes lit with a pride I hadn't seen in myself before. And there, on the desk, was the lamp. Its warm light pooled across the polished surface, exactly the way it had during those quiet nights. For a heartbeat, I was transported back to the girl I had been, the maid who stayed after her shift, stealing hours to chase a dream too fragile to speak aloud. I walked slowly to the desk and ran my fingertips along the edge. My throat tightened with memory. "It feels smaller than I remember," I said with a shaky laugh. Ethan leaned against the doorway, hands in his pockets. "That's because you've grown. The room didn't change. You did." I turned to look at him. There was no judgment in his eyes now, no pity, just quiet admiration. He crossed the room and picked up the fountain pen from its usual spot. "I kept it here," he said, placing it in my palm, "because I knew you'd come back when it was truly yours." The weight of it in my hand felt different now. Not like a borrowed key to a world I didn't belong to, but like something I had earned through every late night, every sacrifice, every page I'd read under bad lighting in our cramped kitchen. I sat in the leather chair, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder. The city stretched out below, lights winking like 1,000 small promises. Ethan's voice was gentle, almost reverent. Do you ever think about those nights? All the time, I said. My voice caught, and I swallowed hard. It's where I first believed I could be more than my circumstances. Where I first believed in us, maybe, even if I couldn't admit it back then. He smiled faintly, and in the glow of the desk lamp, I realized this room wasn't a borrowed sanctuary anymore. It was the place where two worlds had collided, broken apart, and now, finally, met again on equal ground. I stayed seated at the desk for a long moment, letting the soft light of the lamp wrap around me. It wasn't just a room anymore, it was a chapter of my life, one that had started with fear and hope tangled together. Ethan moved quietly behind me, and I could feel the warmth of his presence before I heard his voice. You know, he said softly, this is where I first really saw you. I turned in the chair to face him. His eyes were steady, filled with a warmth that made my chest tighten. I'd seen you before, of course, he continued, cleaning, moving around the apartment, polite and quiet. But that night, he paused as if remembering. You were bent over your books, exhausted but determined. You looked up at me like you were ready to be thrown out, but all I could think was, she's extraordinary. My throat caught. All the memories came rushing back. The fear, the trembling hands, the shame I felt for wanting more than what life had handed me. I wasn't extraordinary, I whispered. I was just trying to survive. He knelt beside the chair, and the sight of a man like Ethan Blake kneeling on the carpet of his own penthouse to look me in the eye made the moment feel surreal. No, he said quietly. You were fighting for your future, and that's braver than anything I'd ever done at your age. I didn't know it then, but that night changed everything for me. He reached into his pocket, and my heart stuttered as he pulled out a small velvet box. For a second, all I could do was stare, the air thick with the hum of the city below and the soft glow of the lamp above us. Emma Rodriguez, he said, his voice a mix of certainty and emotion. I fell in love with your determination first, then your mind, then every single thing about you. I don't care where you came from, and I don't care how long it took us to get here. Will you marry me? The room blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I thought of my father, of my mother, of all the nights on the bus staring at other people's windows, wondering if I would ever get to belong somewhere. I thought of leaving this very apartment in the rain, feeling like a ghost in someone else's story. And now, here I was, being asked to write the next chapter as an equal. Yes, I whispered, my voice breaking. Then louder with a shaky laugh. Yes, I will. Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger. It wasn't flashy, just a simple band with a small diamond that caught the lamplight. It was perfect, because it felt like us. Quiet, hard-earned, and steady. He pulled me into an embrace, and for a moment, the city outside and the years behind us disappeared. All I could feel was the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against mine, and the soft circle of light that had witnessed everything, our first look, our unspoken dreams, and now, this promise. When we finally pulled back, I glanced at the desk one more time. The fountain pen lay there, reflecting the lamp's glow. I reached for it and held it between us. This, I said softly, is where it all began. He smiled. And now we build the rest together. I placed the pen back on the desk, my ring catching the light as I let my fingers linger on the smooth wood. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in this room. I felt like I had finally come home. 5 years can change a life in ways you never imagine. The sun was just beginning to set over San Francisco, painting the city in soft amber light, when I walked into the office that had once been my secret refuge. It didn't feel like a borrowed space anymore. It was our home. Bookshelves lined the walls, stacked with law journals, children's storybooks, and architectural sketches. The leather chair still faced the window, and on the desk, the familiar lamp cast its golden glow across the room, and there, under that light, was my son. "Mateo," I said gently, leaning against the doorway. "What are you up to?" He looked up at me with a grin so wide it could have melted the coldest heart. In his chubby hands he held the fountain pen, twirling it clumsily as if it were a magic wand. "Mommy, is this the pen that makes people win?" he asked, his voice full of innocent wonder. I laughed softly and walked over, kneeling beside him. "In a way, yes. This pen helped me believe I could do big things. But it's not magic. The magic is here." I tapped his small chest lightly. "It's in believing in yourself." He nodded solemnly, the way only a 5-year-old can, and placed the pen carefully back on the desk. The engraved letters EB caught the lamplight, and a rush of memories came back. Rainy nights on the bus, long hours in this very room, the first time I dared to dream I could cross the invisible line between our worlds. Now, my world was here. I stood and walked to the window, watching the bay shimmer in the distance. My law degree hung on the wall to my left, framed and simple. Over the past few years, I had built a career representing the very people I once stood beside: janitors, nannies, food service workers. My first big case had made local headlines, a victory for a group of domestic workers who had gone unpaid for months. Some nights were still long, and the work was never easy. But every time I stepped into a courtroom, I carried the voices of people like my father with me. And when I came home, I carried the quiet joy of knowing I had become the person that scared, exhausted girl once wished she could be. From the hallway, I heard Ethan's voice calling, "Dinner's ready." I smiled and scooped up Mateo, his small arms wrapped around my neck, and he buried his face against my shoulder. We walked together through the apartment that now smelled like roasted vegetables and warm bread, a home that had once felt impossible. Ethan met us in the kitchen, apron still on, hair a little messy from rushing around. He leaned over to kiss Mateo on the forehead and brushed his lips against mine with a warmth that still made my heart skip. "Was he playing with the pen again?" Ethan asked, amused. "Of course," I said. "One day he's going to write his own story with it." Ethan's eyes softened as he looked toward the office, just like his mom. After dinner, when Mateo fell asleep curled up with his favorite picture book, I returned to the office alone. The city outside was a galaxy of lights, and the lamp glowed steady as always. I sat in the chair, touched the pen, and let myself feel the weight of those 5 years. Every struggle, every choice, every small victory that led me here. I thought about the invisible walls that had once felt so high, the rain-soaked night I walked away, and the bridge I'd built piece by piece. My son's laughter still echoed faintly down the hall, and I realized this life wasn't just mine. It was the continuation of every dream I'd ever held under that golden light. I whispered to the quiet room, "We made it." And for the first time, I truly believed it. The apartment was quiet after Mateo fell asleep, the kind of peaceful silence I used to dream about on long bus rides home. I padded softly to the office, our office now, and turned on the familiar desk lamp. Its golden circle of light spilled across the surface, illuminating the pen, a stack of legal briefs, and a half-finished drawing of a house that Mateo had made with Ethan earlier. I sat in the leather chair and turned toward the window. The city stretched beneath me, alive with 1,000 glittering lights. Bridges arched gracefully over the bay, ferries traced silver paths on dark water, and the towers downtown blinked like beacons. There was a time when I only saw this city from its edges, through fogged bus windows with sore feet and a heart too heavy to lift. I was the invisible girl cleaning other people's homes, sneaking study hours in the shadows, always afraid someone would remind me where I belonged. Now, I wasn't on the outside looking in anymore. I thought about the girl I used to be, crouched on this very floor with a battered laptop, certain that one wrong step would end the fragile dream I carried. I thought of the rain-soaked night I walked away, feeling small and defeated but determined to hold on to myself. And then I thought of all the bridges I built after that. One textbook, one case, one choice at a time. I ran my fingers over the fountain pen, the cool metal warming in my hand. It wasn't just a pen anymore. It was the story of how I learned to believe that my dreams weren't too big for me, that a maid from Oakland could become a lawyer, a mother, a woman who no longer flinched at her own reflection in the glass. The city outside didn't change for me. I changed for it. I rose and stepped closer to the window. Our building wasn't the tallest, but from here, I could see everything. The streets where I once waited for the bus with tired eyes, the courthouse where I first felt like I belonged, the library where I spent countless nights. Behind me, the desk lamp glowed softly, the same way it had on the first night Ethan saw me. Not as a maid, but as a woman fighting for her future. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. No wall is truly unbreakable if you're willing to keep walking toward your own light. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the city settle in my chest, and whispered to the girl I used to be, the one who once trembled in the shadows of this very room. We made it, and we're not done yet. When I turned off the lamp and stepped into the hallway toward my family, I carried that warmth with me. Not the glow of the light, but the glow of knowing that I had crossed every bridge I once thought impossible. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person scrubbing floors with a secret dream in their heart, every night student carrying books on the bus, every invisible soul daring to believe they could step into the light. The city outside shimmered, and I smiled to myself, ready for whatever came next.